You've had this problem before. When it comes to finding the perfect gift, what do you get for the person who has everything? Thanks to Kohl's, you can give the gift a great sleep. Find the comfiest bedding from Serta, Cuddle Duds, The Big One, and more to bring the best rest they've had all year. Get your picks even sooner when you shop online with fast and free store pickup or head to a Kohl's near you.
It takes a lot of ingredients to fix or build a car, like cooking, but without the frozen dinner easy way out. eBay Motors has 122 million parts. It's always the right fitment, so you can follow any recipe to a T. Whether it's a vintage Italian coupe that's classic like Grandma's meatballs or a German luxury car that's as complicated as Oma's rouladen, to cook up something great in the garage, use the eBay Motors app or visit ebaymotors.com. Let's ride.
Welcome to the AEW Match Guide podcast, where we deep dive into the best matches in AEW history. Brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network and your host, Sam Brown. Yes, hello, and welcome to the AEW Match Guide podcast. I'm your host, Sam Brown. Thank you for joining me. Every week, alongside a special guest, I take an in-depth look at one of the best matches in AEW history, taken from the definitive AEW Match Guide, as ranked by over 30 wrestling commentators from around the internet wrestling community. If you enjoy the show today, you can subscribe and rate it on the podcast app of your choice. My guest for today is a podcaster and writer for Pro Wrestling Musings and Eno Wrestling, Gareth, and we're looking at Jon Moxley versus Brodie Lee from Double or Nothing 2020. How are you going today, Gareth?
I'm not too bad. I'm excited to talk about this match, even though, for obvious reasons, it will bring up some sad memories as well, but also happy ones.
Yeah, indeed. And for those of you who know me, you will know that I have been probably chomping at the bit and restraining myself from doing a Jon Moxley match. This is the first one I get to dig into here on the AEW Match Guide podcast. So I'm also very excited. And also, yeah, look, I'm very excited to talk about Mr. Brodie Lee and the special person that he was for AEW. Before I get into the actual match, though, before we get into it, I just want to ask you what I ask all of my first-time guests. Gareth, how did you get into AEW?
Well, I've been watching since the start because, you know, wrestling was on a downhill curve before that a little bit, at least for me. I was very much falling out of love with WWE, and the only thing kind of keeping me hanging on was that NXT was pretty decent at the time, and then there wasn't a whole lot of great alternatives. I was just starting to get into New Japan from my friend who introduced me to them as AEW was starting up. I'd always been like a Cody guy. He was one of my favorites when he was in WWE. And then when he left, I kind of kept an eye on him. And that's kind of how I was introduced, I guess, to a lot of the independent wrestling or New Japan or anything like that.
He sort of had his tour where he just went to everywhere. I think he had 1 year where he wrestled in a WrestleMania, a Bound for Glory and Impact Bound for Glory, and a ROH Final Battle, like an incredible year of just popping up left, right, and center. Yeah,
exactly. So that kind of opened my eyes a little bit to more things, but like it was only really following around one guy. And then I saw bits and stuff of like Okada, Omega, but it was just stuff that like my friend was showing me here and there. I wasn't properly into it. But then that year I started getting properly into New Japan, started watching the back catalogue as well. So I was watching the rise of like Omega, and at least within New Japan, obviously did stuff elsewhere. But yeah, I was watching that and, stuff like the Young Bucks as well. It just was then building my excitement for AEW, learning more about that, and then also just going through the history of New Japan as well. But in regards to AEW, it was that really. And then after Double or Nothing, I was just sold on it. Obviously, I watched All In as well, and that was fantastic. But Double or Nothing being their first show, after that, I was just sold on it. The Cody Dustin match was one I've wanted for so long, and yeah, that's a match we could easily speak about in the future because that was one which I loved as well. But it kind of promised to be everything I kind of wanted, and so far it's more or less delivered on that. So long may that continue, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, for those of you who are listening, I do have those very tippy top matches sort of reserved. I've put them down for later. I think there's we could do a lot of digging into those, but I don't want to do everything at once. You know how wrestling is. You put put the main event last. We're not going to be waiting years.
Unless you're Tony Khan.
But But one of the things that I wanted to do with this project is dig into some of the matches that don't necessarily get all of the hype and all of the retrospectives that those top matches get, like the Dustin and Cody match, like, that tag match between the Bucks and Hangman and Kenny, which we will get into at some point down the line, like Stadium Stampede. But matches, like this one we're doing today, Brodie Lee versus Jon Moxley at a year later at Double or Nothing 2020. And with that, let's transition into talking about the match and to introduce it, the flowers that it got. With Dave Meltzer, he rated it 4.25 in the Wrestling Observer newsletter. Cage Match currently have it sitting at 8.14, and the Definitive Match Guide had it ranked in at 17th. And, of course, I think it should probably be noted that Jon Moxley won the AEW Wrestler of the Year for most publications, including Wrestling Headlines, back in 2020. And he was also the top of the PWI Illustrated for the year that this match took place. So this is a highly touted and a highly respected match, even if it's not in that very top tier. And I think we're going to be able to really dig into it today. Of course, for the build of it, this was Jon Moxley's second defense of the AEW Championship that he won at Revolution in that just fantastic program against Chris Jericho, where he had to fight through the entire Inner Circle and then finally won it. Unfortunately, a week after he won it, the world changed. We all went into lockdown, and the crowds who Moxley had been feeding off went away. His first defense was against Jake Hager. We can talk a little bit about that match. I do think there's some positives to it. I think at the time I called it the perfect build for the not so perfect match. Gareth, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but do you have any memories at all of the Jake Hager versus Jon Moxley match?
Yeah, nightmares. I think it's one of those matches which kind of gets looked back on really negatively because, number one, it was kind of that start of that period where there were no fans, and all companies, I think, were kind of getting to grips with it. I think by the time AEW got to Double or Nothing, they more or less got to grips with it. But for the match between Mox and Hager, it was definitely one they were still trying to figure out how exactly do we do this without a crowd. I think I can't remember how long the match was, but it felt like an age. The amount that Tony Khan hyped it up, which I think he did because he was just like, we need people to watch, and I don't know how else I'm going to do this without just overhyping it. It's still something that gets brought up today, though, in terms of when it comes to trusting Tony Khan, people still bring it up as like, oh, remember that Hager Moxley match? And it's like,
yeah, I think he said it was like one of the greatest matches they'd ever produced or something, and they'd pre-recorded it, so he'd had a chance to watch it ahead of time, and it just had JR's the Soul Man on commentary. Yeah, Moxley was really affected. I think the start of his run was really affected by the pandemic in that he got locked out of the Georgia tapings that they did. So he really was unable to play a significant role at all in the early pandemic in those first, 6 or 7 weeks that they had, apart from this match, which, as we've said, was a bit of a fizzer. So not going too well. How did you feel about Moxley as AEW champion at this point, Gareth?
It was weird because Jericho had just had a really good reign where, not just the Moxley feud, but the Cody one, and then the bits he did with Jungle Boy and Scorpio Sky and stuff like that. It was just a very exciting title reign, and then obviously the entire world was changing, so it wasn't anything you ever really held against Moxley. But you're right in that the start of his reign was very much affected, and it's kind of amazing that he was able to recover to the level of people calling it one of the best babyface, title reigns of all time, when he did it through a pandemic and when he wasn't there for the first however many weeks it was of, TV. But yeah, it was definitely affected. But again, I think Moxley just being one of the best, he was able to recover that very well. And the match we're going to get onto is a huge reason as to why, I think, really.
Yeah, that's what I would say as well, is that this match played a big part in getting things back on track for him. We'll get into the legacy of it, where this sits against his other title defenses. But yeah, look, you won't find too many bigger Jon Moxley fans than me going around. But even for myself, I was kind of like, oh, this is not ideal. Even though that there's circumstances around it, it's still not what you want to see when you've got this champion who had so much momentum and flopping in his first defense, and the title reign that he's having not have the juice at all that you really want from that top guy, that top face. Brodie Lee, of course. This was his first major match in AEW that he was having. He was revealed as the Exalted One in one of the first closed shows that they had. He had a few squash matches, and he had a number of vignettes that sort of showed him to be this really highly strung but powerful and intimidating cult leader, sort of inspired by Vince McMahon. I thought there was like some David Miscavige, the leader of Scientology, influence there in the vignettes that they were having. And he set himself up as this sort of powerful leader of the Dark Order. The Dark Order was one of the sort of poison chalices of AEW early on, one of the things that was used to beat the writers and the bookers with, and rightly so. Some of it was really terrible. Gareth, what did you think of Brodie Lee coming in, taking over the Dark Order, and what did you think of his early presentation?
It was a funny one, because I was always a big fan of Brodie Lee when he was obviously Luke Harper in WWE. I always was one of those people calling for him to get a push. I remember there was a WrestleMania, I think the one where he faced Randy Orton, and everyone just wanted a triple threat and Luke Harper, as he was, to win the match. Like, well, not everyone, but like a lot of online fans, and I was one of those. And then when he returned during that Daniel Bryan and Rowan feud against Roman Reigns, when Bryan then went babyface and he returned there, that was a moment where, like, one of the last moments I remember being genuinely excited by anything WWE did, just because I was such a big fan. But, you know, I knew he wanted to leave, and as, you know, AEW started becoming a thing properly week to week, I was just like, it'd be great to have, like, Brodie Lee come in and just be this monster who just tears through, because they didn't have many big guys either at the time. They've obviously got more now, but at the time, it was very much a smaller roster, and I was just like, just imagine Brodie Lee against, like, Jungle Boy or whatever, and it's a shame we didn't get to see a lot of those matches. So when he came in, I was really excited, but because the Dark Order was, like you said, it was kind of this weird thing at the time. You know, the end to 2019 was very bad for the Dark Order, and they were not quite as bad by the time Brody came in, just because they'd done a bit of recovery on a lot of that stuff. But it was still one of these things where I was like, I've been looking forward to him coming in, and now he's joining these dorks. But yeah, I mean, it turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because he actually managed to save the Dark Order and get them over. And it was only like a couple of weeks after his debut where I was a little bit like, obviously I was happy to see him, but then it was just a bit like, I'm not so happy about what's going on exactly in terms of him being the Dark Order. But it was only a couple of weeks later where I was like, actually, this is pretty good, because he was doing really good work. Like you said, those vignettes, I really enjoyed those. And by the time they got out of QT Marshall's gym and properly into that feud with Jon Moxley, the actual build to this match, I was really enjoying it. There was a promo that Brodie Lee cut where he'd taken out Jon Moxley, and he was basically just staring at the title and outlining why he wanted to face Jon Moxley and stuff. And that was a really great promo. And then there's this funny moment where, like, Jon Moxley said, dude, all you had to do was ask, and then Brody just tears him apart again. So like, it was something that initially I was skeptical on, but it didn't take very long for me to, me personally anyway, to get turned around on it. Obviously, I know for a lot of people it took a little bit longer, but I think even then, by the end of this match, Moxley and Brody, most people were over that and were like, okay, let's actually see where this goes now. So yeah, I don't think it actually took that long, just because of the quality of the work he was doing in those vignettes and stuff. Yeah,
I remember the ones that I remember specifically. There was like the eating the steak vignette.
Yeah,
and he had this just really bloody raw steak, and he was forcing the people to watch him. And then there was the one where the guy coughed. Of course, that's a very famous thing that Vince McMahon just cannot stand, and he went off on him, just cutting this incredibly intimidating figure. And he's got these guys around him who are like John Silver and Alex Reynolds at the time. They're like jokes, and they're just quivering in their boots at the presence of this guy. And he also brings in Preston Vance, who at the time, like, we didn't know anything about him other than he was just this jacked dude who actually looked quite menacing and had a one-on-one match with Jon Moxley, which was, it was nothing to write home about, but it was still like, wow, look at the change that this influence has brought already. These guys aren't a joke anymore. Like, this guy is intimidating, and he's bringing in these people who are going to be even further intimidating presences. And yeah, as you said, there's that he stole the championship off Jon Moxley, and he did this brilliant thing actually where in that beatdown that you're talking about, where they beat down Jon Moxley, and Jon Moxley just gets a microphone and says, if you wanted a match, all you had to do was ask. And he walks off, but he actually leaves one of his minions out there for Jon Moxley at Jon Moxley's mercy. And of course, Mox being, the guy that he is, takes him out and takes out his frustration and anger on him. And Brodie Lee, he has no sympathies for that because he can't tolerate weakness, which, it just was an incredibly powerful performance, I think. And he built and built and built down the line after this match. But early on just came on as this incredible presence in the roster, and he would maintain that and only continue to build on that, I feel like. Did you have anything else you'd just like to add about Brodie Lee or about the build to this match before we get into the match itself?
One thing I would like to say is that, like, obviously we're talking about Brodie's inspirations and stuff for this kind of character, and one of the ones he said was like kind of gangster films and stuff like that, basically him being like the boss of like a gang. And it was kind of funny because he very much acted like that, but he brought up like John Silver and Alex Reynolds, and like the guys around him very much weren't. So it was this really kind of comedic juxtaposition in his presentation and the people he's actually leading just kind of being jokes. And that's really kind of what really helped them get over, particularly on BTE and stuff, with like
the papers,
all that great stuff. And it was just one of those things where it's like Brody as an intimidating force was always going to be great because his facial expressions, the way he carries himself, has always been brilliant. But like, I was thinking more as like just someone who comes in and kind of just like destroys people and stuff. And he actually created a much more nuanced, proper character than I ever thought that, like, not that he could, but just that they would do with him, just because of how it'd been used in WWE, mostly been silent and stuff like that. So yeah, it was really nice to see him do something new and really push himself as a performer, like, and from a character point of view as well. Like, it was really nice to see like what he could do and stuff, not just in the ring, which I think we'd all seen anyway, but like that other side of him was really great to see.
Yeah, particularly the command that he showed on the mic, just and the way that he had with words to just cut to the chase and cut people down, and as I said, just exude this power and intimidation that he had. They really did lead into that contrast, particularly on BTE early on in his run on AEW TV. Of course, they didn't have that. They did lean into it a little bit more later on, as the audience, I guess, grew more accustomed to Brodie Lee. But straight away on BTE, they really did lead into that that contrast of particularly him picking on Uno and getting him to whack himself in the head with papers. Great stuff. Look, we should get into the match, of course, and what happened on the night. So, of course, it was at Double or Nothing 2020. So the first pay-per-view they had without any formal crowds. They had, some people at ringside, some of the extra cast and crew at the ringside making noise. And this is the second one we've done like this. This is the second match we've looked at that was part of the empty arena. The other one we did was FTR versus the Young Bucks, a limited crowd. But it really must be said, like, the stroke of genius it was, putting extras out there just to give some energy, even though it's not a full crowd. They, brought some energy to it and gave at least a small feel of having, some ambience there, as opposed to just an empty arena with two guys getting stuck into each other. Just an absolute masterstroke by AEW. And of course, everyone copied it because it was so brilliant. They had a really great video package for this match, really contrasting the two characters. Mox as this unstable, pissed off and dangerous, but ultimately sort of heroic man who, you want to be like and you want to have a beer with. And a guy who's got a motive. Like, this is a man who had achieved what he wanted, but then had it immediately stripped from him, both in the sense of the pandemic stripping the crowds away, but then, of course, Brodie Lee literally stripping the title from him. So this anti-hero just pissed off and with a mission. And then, of course, you've got Brody as this intimidating, powerful man, as we've talked about, who's using people around him to get the things he wants and, using these people as tools, as props to do his bidding. And in this case, it's get the AEW Championship. So this, really great contrast of characters that's summed up in this video package. And then when they come out, they've got, and I love this touch, Gareth, security dividing up the ring. That just always gives it a big match feel to me and sort of adds an element of danger.
Yeah, it was really funny because, obviously the match itself, I think, was a no disqualification, although you wouldn't really know it actually watching the match because it feels like they just tear each other apart using whatever they can find. But it's always it's just about within the rules. But yeah, the security holding them apart dividing the ring at least, was really good, especially because in a time like this, anything you can do that just kind of distracted us from the fact that there wasn't a crowd was great, and that kind of just built the energy within it. There's a minute's period or something like that where Moxley's making his entrance and Brody's just staring at him with his his brilliant stare that he does, and it was just very menacing, but again building the atmosphere where there really wasn't an atmosphere there just for them, so they did have to kind of create that. And yeah, I think it was a great little touch, like you say, probably something that generally goes under the radar, but a really, really great touch. And that video package, you brought up a point of Moxley having a motive. Obviously, for a challenger, there's always a motive in that, the title and stuff. But it's always great when you can invest further in something than just who's going to get the piece of metal at the end of the match. And Moxley, like you said, his motive of having he's kind of had everything taken away from him, and despite the fact he's got the title to lose, he kind of comes into the match with nothing to lose, and it's brilliant. But then also again, Brodie Lee, it's not just the title to him that solidifies him as the top dog, and that solidifies him as the guy. So there's an ulterior motive, not just to actually having the title, but an egotistical one as well. So it was really great stuff, really, considering I don't think it was the original plan either. I can't imagine they planned, Moxley's first pay-per-view defense will be against this guy who's not been here very long. Before the pandemic struck, it really felt like MJF was being built, and then they realized obviously he wasn't at the tapings either, and I think they realized we need more to build this match. And at the time there was still some hope that maybe by the summer there would be a crowd, even though obviously we look back now and it was all how naive we all were. I'm not happy the pandemic happened, obviously, but I am happy that Brody got this match, because obviously in hindsight we know he didn't get much time, and it's not really a blessing in disguise, that, but it's a good thing that came out of a bad situation for me.
Absolutely. Yeah, and Brody, when he comes out, he's wearing new gear. He strips off his robe, he's wearing his new gear, and it's the gear that I didn't like the gear that he was wearing before that. It had the ones that he was wearing before that were the ones with the scars and stuff on it. There's fake zips and things. It just never worked for me until this gear, which immediately was fantastic, and it was the one that he wore for the rest of his run with AEW. So, great to debut it in the biggest match possible. And Mox comes in his usual intense self, and as you said, Brody's just staring a hole at him. Mox is pacing like a caged animal, just this rabid animal who wants to get at him. And Brody intimidates Dasher into announcing him as the self-proclaimed AEW world champion. As we've said, his thing was that he uses people and he intimidates and bullies people, and it's just such a immediately perfect example of that as they go to do the introductions. And when I was watching this, you mentioned you thought it might have been no DQ. I have a memory of it being no DQ as well, but everywhere I've looked doesn't seem to mention that. So I think it was, if it may have been no DQ. If it wasn't, it was kind of that referee's discretion. We need to get a result, and are you really going to stop these two? Do you want to be the person that steps in between Jon Moxley and Brodie Lee?
Yeah, because that's what there was a moment on commentary, and JR was like, the ref, he doesn't want to disqualify these guys, doesn't want to count them out. Neither of them want that, and we all want to see a winner and stuff. But then there's other moments where Moxley throws one of the chips at Brodie's head, and it's like, surely that's a weapon. Yeah. But I think it's just one of those things where the ref decided, look, if I disqualify either of these guys, they're going to kill me. So I'm just going to have to let them do.
And they're both in for it as well. Neither of them are flinching from using anything and everything around the ring at the time. And it starts off really, the match starts off really fast. Mox immediately, as we've said, he's really pissed off, really motivated, stripped of everything, needs to get everything back, immediately charges Brodie Lee. Brody immediately reverses him into the corner. There's trading hard strikes from the get-go. Within minutes, they're on the outside. Brody hits this giant suicide dive within the first minute and a half or so. Mox does that, and then Brody does that. Yeah. And you can tell that these two know each other and respect each other and are friends by how hard they're going at each other. I feel like with wrestling, you'll see two people who might not like each other or might not not know each other so well, will be a bit tentative, but two people are really close when they're really just clobbering the crap out of each other. Right from the get-go, you've got this sort of contrast of Brodie Lee being more powerful and smarter, setting up traps and countering Jon Moxley, but that only firing up Jon Moxley more and making him more pissed off. And you've got them suplexing each other through barricades on the outside, big chop exchanges. These guys worked out really early on in Pandemic Wrestling that one of the cheat codes that you can do is to just smash into each other really, really hard and go really hard and fast. What did you think of the early goings on in this match, Gareth?
It was great. It was just, I think it's exactly what we all needed, especially where it was placed on the card as well. Getting towards the end, it's you don't want to see Brodie Lee throw Moxley in a headlock and grind him down. Yeah. Really, you just want to see these two guys just go at each other, especially again when you haven't got that crowd and you're getting towards the end of a pay-per-view. I was trying to remember when I was doing my notes for this, how I felt at the time, and I just have this memory of just I don't know if I actually had a big smile on my face, but that was the feeling, just having a big smile on my face and just being like, this is great, just particularly early on, but throughout the whole match really. Yeah. But yeah, like you said, there were those two dives which kind of Mox did one, and then they had a little brawl, and then Brody did one, and then he dominates for a little bit, and then Mox manages to come back into it. They had that great, very Japanese kind of style of they had the exchanging of strikes, and very different ones. There was a point even where JR was I think those Asian wrestlers really like their open palm strikes, and then Excalibur says, yeah, big thing in Japan or something like that, and it is quite funny. But yeah, it was very much inspired, obviously, by that. Moxley, obviously, we know is very much takes a lot of inspiration, and Brody as well. He harkens back a lot. Well, a lot of his inspiration obviously comes from what he grew up on, All Japan, and then also, obviously stuff like Bruiser Brody. There was that great Bruiser Brody stomp as well in there, which I think Excalibur or it might have been Shivani or someone brought up on commentary, which is a really great. Yeah, JR. Yeah. So yeah, they were just really going for it. I think there was a Gotch style pile driver, which Brody just kicks out of, and that was just a move they just did. It just shows you how kind of fast and kind of hard hitting this match was. The fact that Suzuki's finisher was just basically just a move, not even for a near fall, really. Yeah.
I love how this does actually gave me big vibes of the matches that Mox had with Suzuki and Tomohiro Ishii in New Japan, which of course, as we've said, it is a giant strong style battle almost. This is where you've just got these two guys charging at each other from the start. They're not exchanging headlocks. They're just tearing into each other. And I love how Mox picks up the Gotch style pile driver from Suzuki, and he's used that throughout actually. And I love like that continuation and how he's gone to New Japan. He's had this match with the guy who he now considers to be like a great rival of his, and he's actually picked up a move off him as well. I love that. And I love their selling. You know, they're not waiting around. There's not a lot of time where they're sort of just lying down selling exhaustion like, you know, may happen in some matches, because they just want to keep the energy levels up. But when they are selling, you know, they're really gritting their teeth through this pain that they're going through, and they're really pushing onwards despite the fact that they know that they're hurting, and they know they're getting hurt, and they know that they're in a war. And as we've said, they're going all over the arena. There's like this tiny little timetable that Mox sets the stairs up next to, and they tease like Mox getting powerbombed by Brodie Lee through this tiny little table. And instead Mox reverses it, sending Brody over. They don't smash through it because, as I said, it's tiny. He just flips overwards. And there's this great like camera shot, and this is a really cinematic match. This is something I'll talk more about later, but there's this great shot after Mox reverses that powerbomb and flicks Brodie Lee through the timetable, where Mox just sort of winks at the camera, and I was just like, bang, that is his character there. Like he's you know, he's this, even though he's this violent, intense guy, he's also got like some charm to him, and he just drips cool as well. He's a violent man, but he's also a guy you'd love to have a beer with. And just after he's done this thing, he just winks to the camera. But from that, Brodie Lee just rises up like swinging. They're just telling this story that Mox can damage Brodie Lee all he wants, but this man is a monster who's just going to keep coming back from anything that happens to him. Yeah, it's pretty just straightforward, but that is the story really of this match, is that like Mox he can take a beating and he can give one out, but Brody just seems like he's not going to die. Like, again, he sells that table spot for a bit, but then like before long he's up on his feet, and like there's not really a period where Mox really, or Brody really to a large extent anyway, like has this period of domination, because like they just keep going for each other, and then the one guy will find a way to find some kind of reversal or a way to, you know, use one's momentum against, you know, their opponent and stuff. And it is just them kind of going at each other. But particularly as you move towards the end, like they're really telling that story that like Brody just can't be killed. Like, and I remember when I was watching it the first time, like I was like slightly hopeful, because I really like Brody, even though I didn't want Moxley's title reign to end. Slightly hopeful. I was like, oh my God, are they just going to randomly flip the title onto him? Because it just seemed like, you know, he was taking so much, and it was like, what are they actually going to do to actually end it? Because I don't know. And obviously with the pandemic and stuff, there were all these things where it's like, I don't know, maybe they just think, we'll save Moxley's title reign, he can win it back, and we'll just do this now. Because, you know, and it was a time where like felt like really anything could happen. So there was actually, they managed to create a sense of doubt in my head, even though any logical thinking really says no, because it was Mox's second title defense. But yeah, particularly as you're moving towards the end, like towards that ending sequence, you're before you got there, you're just thinking, what does Mox have to do in order to get the win? And then eventually you actually see what he does. But it was just, it was crazy throughout, really crazy. And this next few minutes after Brody gets put through this table is probably the...
Shop on eBay this holiday season to get more for your dough on stand mixers, or get more for your buck on this season's hottest tech and gaming gear. And on eBay, you can even get more bling for less cha-ching on jewelry. You can get more because you save more on premium brands with eBay's exclusive deals. Get more when you get it on eBay.
For the ones going above and beyond. For the ones reaching out, helping out, and lending a hand. For the ones people count on. you can count on Grainger. Grainger offers supplies and solutions for every industry, backed by 24/7 customer support and specialists to help with hard-to-find products. Because you've got everyone's back, we've got yours. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Only period of like sustained dominance where Brody gets on offense. He suplexes Mox through one of those giant wooden playing cards that's at ringside, and takes the time to stomp on Mox's face with the playing card. That's actually the second time he interacts with the Moxley pictures that are at ringside, which I thought was interesting. He like can't even stand the fact that there's photos of this guy around the ringside. And Mox barely makes it back to the ring. And as soon as he gets there, Brody's there, straps pulled down, and gives him that fantastic big boot you mentioned. And then a huge power bomb. And when Mox kicks out, Brodie Lee just shouts like, "No!" Just rage fueled. And then Mox rises up from the corner, like punching himself in the face with a crazed look in his eyes. Like, how good are these two men's facial expressions?
Yeah, that's one thing like I've always said about Brody. He's my favorite in terms of like facial expressions, because like no matter the emotion really, he's a fantastic actor. And you saw that in the vignettes and stuff, like, and it really wasn't a surprise. It was just the fact we hadn't seen it, but the fact that he was able to really create such a great on-screen character, because obviously in WWE, you know, his part in the Wyatt family, he was great in that. But like it was very much a character who was to the side. Bray Wyatt was the focus. But yeah, here, like he was really able to come into that. And those facial expressions, they tell so much. And then Moxley as well is just like, again, he's just the guy who's great at everything, really. So it's no surprise. But like these two really are, like, that's a great point to make, because they are two of the best when it comes to that, especially in the heat of a battle. They know when to pick those moments to show that. And again, that frustration from Brody when Mox kicks out of a powerbomb is a great moment, because it's just like you're watching it and you're just like, oh god, I'd never want to come across this man, because it feels like if you came across him in a coffee shop and you accidentally knock his coffee over and say, "Oh, sorry, I'll buy you a new one." He won't listen. He'll just be like, and he'll just take your head off. Like, he seems like a guy. He comes across so much as someone who just will take no, like,
he'll take the smallest slight and take giant offense at it. Yeah,
exactly. Which is funny because, you know, from all accounts, the actual guy is like the nicest guy ever. But he's so good at that. That kind of thing. And that moment where Mox kicks out and he has that like outburst of just frustration, it's just fantastic, really.
And then, of course, I think the one thing that most people remember from this match, the one moment and spot, is what they get to next, is where they sort of brawl up onto the stage and they start trading blows, and then Mox hits that incredible paradigm shift through the ramp that's heading to the ring, and they both just go straight through the wooden ramp, shot incredibly. You could just see just their feet sticking out because they've just gone so far into it, and the ref like is sort of leaning in there trying to work out what does he do at this point, and Mox is the first to just like crawl out of this hole, just crawling back to the middle of the ring on his arms, can't even raise himself up, and as he's trying to rise himself up, this is one of my favorite shots in wrestling. In the background, just behind him, you just see this monster rising up from this hole with blood coming down his face and rage. And you're just like, as you said, like, how can they kill this man? That shot is just so incredible and so dramatic and so cinematic. AEW sometimes doesn't get their production right, and at this point they were, really still finding their feet. They would miss the odd shot, particularly when there was lots of going on in the ring. But man, they absolutely nailed it in this match in particular, and particularly with this shot.
Yeah, you're right to say that is the spot everyone just thinks of, because it's just like, it was that moment, and I think people forget there was actually quite a bit after that Brody still had to go through, which again just shows like them telling that story of how do you kill this man. But that shot, I'm in complete agreement. Like, one of my favorite things about Brodie Lee, as I basically already said, but those facial expressions and the way he's so good at just finding like the moment to do something, and the way he just rises up behind Moxley, he's like crawling out of the thing, was so brilliant. Even like the referee's like selling of them going through, because he doesn't call for the doctor immediately, which is something that refs sometimes do, and it kind of just tells me like before they've even properly checked or whatever, it just tells me, they're trying to work an angle here. But this, I can't remember who the ref was. I think it was Paul Turner, but he was kind of just on the ring or on the side of the ring there, and then just looking down. He just looked so like genuinely like, what's happened? And I remember at the time being a little bit worked. Was that planned? And I was watching it on call with my friend Kieran, and Kieran was like, "No, that was definitely like those stages don't just crumble like that with that." But I was like so worked to the moment that I was just like, "Oh my god, what's going on?" And yeah, Paul Turner was brilliant at that. And then eventually he does call for the doctor, and then the doctor's kind of looking down, but like doesn't really know what you can do because these guys are not exactly the guys who are going to call for medical assistance. And then Mox, and then you have that moment when
guys away from the fight, are you?
yeah, exactly. And then you have that moment when Mox crawls out, and then Brody rises up, just as you said. And it was fantastic. It's something that kind of just is burned into my mind of like how great it was. And that image in particular, you said, where he rises up, that's the one like lasting memory that really stands out from this match. Also, there was a great thing before that when they were on the stage, like Brody's the one that kind of points out or points to like the bit where they go through. He's initially trying to do it, and I love like the idea of Mox like just comes into everything, calling it on the fly. Obviously, that's a spot they actually would have planned out, but in the world of Mox's character, just him just being like, either I'm going through that or you are, so you're going through that. And it was a great little thing, because I loved it when like Brody was trying to set him up, and then Mox just goes nope, and then just puts him through it. It was fantastic as well. But it's great.
And look, as you said, I think in most people's memories, this match ends pretty much straight after that. And in my memory, it had as well. But then when I rewatched it, like there's actually an extended sequence which is so good, where back in the ring, Brody goes for a discus lariat. Mox counters that into like the Dirty Deeds version of the Paradigm Shift, and Brodie Lee kicks out at 1. It's just like, I'm off my couch at this point, even on the rewatch. And then Mox just rapidly delivering elbows and knees, biting Brodie Lee's head, hits an elevated Paradigm Shift. Brodie Lee kicks out at 2. At that point, I don't think anyone had kicked out of that move since he debuted against Juice Robinson the year earlier. I don't think anyone had kicked out of the elevated Paradigm Shift. And then just Mox is just like grabs a rear naked choke. Brody's just gritting his teeth. There's blood like in his teeth before he like finally passes out, and the ref has to stop it. And then, in the post-match, Mox is flipping off Brodie Lee as he celebrates with the title. He gets in the camera and he's like, "You want to know what happens if you disrespect me? Let that be a lesson." Like, man, what an ending to the match. It's just, this match, as we said, it gets off to a canter from the word go, but the way that they elevate it with and climax it is just phenomenal.
Yeah, it is fantastic. And like I say, like them going through the ramp is the thing that everyone remembers, but actually like that those 2 extra Paradigm Shifts as well. Brody kicking out at 1 was something that like I remember, because I was expecting, coming into the match, I was expecting Mox to win, but I just really wanted Brody to have a good showing. And I just felt like just as he hit that, because when he hit the normal Paradigm Shift, like not the elevated one, I was just like, yes, he's gone through the ramp, but I don't want the match to end, and I'm not satisfied with that. And luckily they didn't end it there. And then the elevated one, I was just like, I just want a little bit more. And then he kicks out, and I was like, great. And then they do the choke. And at the time, I remember I was a little bit disappointed, because I was like, I'm very much someone who likes to see someone fade. Like, you can see, like I've seen people get locked in, dangerous holds and stuff for a good, like almost a minute, like in real fighting, and they don't fade, and they manage to find a way out of it or whatever. Like, obviously, a lot of the time they don't, they end up tapping out or whatever. But like when someone like passes out so quickly, that kind of bothers me. But rewatching this, he doesn't actually pass out. The ref just goes, "You're not actually able to defend yourself, so I'm gonna have to stop the match." Because I remember when I watched it the first time, I thought they kind of told the thing of him passing out, but he wasn't. And then at the end, like, he's just there lying, like, because finally the adrenaline wears off, and he's just kind of staring up at the ceiling just for a good few minutes, and he's just there, like, because everything's kind of hit him now, and it's just kind of like, it's a great moment there for Brodie's character, where he just has to kind of confront that, like, within himself, confront that failure to win and the being beaten for the first time, and then Moxley just screaming down the camera, like you said.
Yep.
And then there was this moment where it's very funny looking back in hindsight, but obviously Brian Cage had debuted earlier after Mox says, whoever, you don't want a piece of this, and then one of the commentators says, like, "Oh, well, Brian Cage wants a piece of it. He's next up," as we found out earlier. And then looking back in hindsight, just being like, wow, that's weird looking at where he is now. But that's a different story, different conversation. But it was just a funny thing. But at the time, just thinking, like, another new monster's just come into the company and doing this, and Mox is he doesn't care. He's just screaming down the camera about how nobody wants anything from him, and it's just fantastic from him, because that's exactly what endears him to us as fans, is that, like, all these dreadful people, like Brodie Lee, the character, obviously, but all these, like, horrible people coming in. Brian Cage obviously just took out Darby Allin, like, just destroyed him, and particularly went out of his way to do so. So they were very much getting him over as a heel. They really went out of their way to make him basically a similar kind of thing as Brodie Lee. And I just remember thinking, like, oh, this title reign is going to be great, kind of, after all. Like, he's just going to tear through all these dreadful people. Obviously, eventually got to MJF as well, which is another one which was obviously building. And it was just like, Jon Moxley's just the man of my dreams. That's kind of just the memory I have, like, of being left with after this match in particular.
Yeah. A thing I want to do is help the internet wrestling community redefine what a cinematic wrestling match is and what that term means, because I don't think the current usage of it is wholly accurate, in that a cinematic match now is what I'd call like a pre-recorded match that often involves extraneous sort of settings and is not necessarily set in a wrestling ring. I'm not sure what I'd exactly define it as, but I feel like cinematic can also be the way you shoot a match, the way that the people in it react to each other. One of my favorite moments in all of wrestling is in Hiroshi Tanahashi versus Kota Ibushi at the G128, the final of that, where Kota Ibushi, like, backs Tanahashi down into a corner, and it's almost like an anime moment or a movie moment where the hero, like, leans down and sees the sand dripping through his fingers and flashbacks to all the memories of the people that he's fighting for, and then just roars across the ring. And to me, that feels like a cinematic moment, in that it reminds me a lot of film and the way that film operates. And I feel like this match is very cinematic in the way that it's shot and the way that it tells this story. Particularly, one of my favorite endings to a movie is the ending to the first Terminator. And I feel like this match almost does the same thing, where you've got the Terminator, who throughout the whole thing is just this unstoppable force that keeps coming and coming. And all the heroes can do is, like, flee from it and buy themselves just a little bit more time to try and find a way to take down this thing. And the whole progression of the movie is them just constantly trying to outrun and buy themselves that extra minute to see if they can work out a way they can, terminate this Terminator, destroy this unstoppable robot. And at the end, they flatten it with this giant anvil that comes down and flattens it. And you're like, oh, well, that has to be the end of it. And then the light flickers on and it just crawls towards them. And you're like, what can these people do? They're never going to be able to escape. And that's how I feel like the ending of this match is. It's like, what can Jon Moxley do to put down this monster that just keeps coming at him and coming at him? And I remember at the end, because of the ending where he passed out, there was like this discourse floating around, in the worst parts of the internet, saying that, like, oh, Brody looked weak. And I was like, how can you watch this match and think that? Like, you don't watch Terminator and think that the Terminator looks weak at the end because they have to dip it in a thing of lava to destroy it. It's just such an incredible way to put this guy over. As we said, like he came across in these initial vignettes as just this powerful, intimidating man, and he could not have fulfilled that more in this match. I don't know if there's a way he could have done, apart from winning, of course, but in loss, there's a way he could have been able to fulfill that initial character more than what they actually did here.
Yeah, no, you've nailed it really there. Like, the one thing for me as like someone who, you know, was really big into Brody and didn't want to see him just be a title challenger and then fade into the background or whatever, was I wanted to see him, you know, really show what he's all about, and they definitely achieved that to the point where when we then got to the Brody versus Cody match, the first one obviously, when they set that up, I was like, I just couldn't see. I thought Cody was going to retain, as I think most people did, but I just couldn't see a way as to how that happened. I was like, I don't really see how they're going to do that without harming Brody, basically. And obviously he won, and that was, you know, brilliant and all that. But like, yeah, it was to the point where it's like I've seen Brody be defeated, but I still, come the next big match, couldn't see how he could possibly lose. Number one, because he wasn't facing Mox, but like even someone like Cody, who's a big star in himself and stuff, even though he's a different style from Mox, I just couldn't see how. And then eventually, obviously, when we got to that, what's the word?
It was a dog collar.
Dog collar, that's the word, yeah. When we got to that, it took a match like that for Cody to actually be able to overcome Brody. And that's the thing with like monsters and wrestling and stuff. Like you say, like ultimately they are there basically to be overcome. They are the obstacle for the good guys to overcome. And yeah, it's the same like in the Terminator or any movie where you've got like a figure like that. These characters exist within storytelling to be overcome. So, you know, as much as you've got to make them look absolutely, you know, unbeatable for like most of, you know, the story you tell, come the end of it, they generally have to be overcome. And that's why, like, when it came to Cody versus Brody, the first match, there was no point in doing a 15-minute match and then having Brody, you know, get the win. Because what's the point? He has to just run through him, and then you build to the ultimate match where he again gets overcome. And it's an unfortunate thing for you know, people who are bigger, because if you're not in WWE, you're going to be, you know, obviously if you're in WWE, you're probably going to be a star. But in like Lance Archer's kind of had to find his place, because he can't just wrestle every week, because if he wrestled every week, he would either have to beat everyone or lose way too often. It's this kind of difficult thing when you've got a rating system or a ranking system, or anything that makes any logical sense, is that like you've got to find your ways in which to do them and tell the stories and stuff. Even with someone like Malachi, who isn't physically big, they've got to find the ways, the places he can lose, and tell the stories behind that. And yeah, and so they managed to do it fantastically in this match, basically. And even though at the time there was that moment where I was like, oh, I felt like he just passed out a little bit too quickly. He doesn't actually pass out. It's just the fact that he's not responding, and then he's just laying there on the ground. Like he's just kind of like you say, as he's in the hold, there's this moment where he's fighting, but he can't physically fight because he's actually reached his limit finally. And you see it in his eyes, and then that you see that go, and that's when the ref then calls it. And it's just, again, it's actually quite it's brilliant acting again from Brody, and again going back to that cinematic point that you made, it kind of ties into that as well.
It's interesting you mentioned Lance Archer, because he actually wrestled earlier on this card against Cody, and got beaten for the TNT Championship. And I was just, when you were mentioning that, I was talking about Giants, and I was thinking Lance Archer's probably had his best matches against Jon Moxley, particularly in AEW. And I was thinking about why, and I think probably the reason for that is with Moxley's character, he's not a face that needs to have this grand triumph. He's the kind of character where getting past by the skin of his teeth is is just as valid. And in this match, that's exactly what he does. Like he grits through it and has all the fire, but he just escapes. Like if this match had gone on longer, who knows what had happened. Whereas in the Cody versus Lance Archer match, it's a much more definitive ending, and that's fitting with the style of character that Cody has, where he's this much more heroic, traditionally heroic face, rather than Moxley, who is more gritty. And I think that's an interesting contrast there, particularly with how we've said how successfully we think this worked for Brody. And as I said at the start, I think this was actually a really important match for Jon Moxley after that Hager match didn't quite hit how it should have, and how he probably wanted it to, and the company probably wanted it to. I thought that this was the program, and particularly the match, where he showed the champion that he wanted to be, like this badass, really cool rogue who would fight through anything and maybe escape by the skin of his teeth, but he would win and fight with fire and heart and grit. And violence as well, because ultimately we watch wrestling. We do actually want to watch people fight and we want to watch people lay it down. Where do you rank this in terms of Jon Moxley's AEW title defenses?
It's got a good argument to be first. I did love the MJF match as well. That was great because, again, as I said earlier, MJF is just the
said a lot about
his
character.
Yeah, but he's the guy you just want to see lose desperately, and Mox is the guy you want to see win desperately. And then the finish of that was great, I thought, because it was just kind of like Mox being like, screw you, I'm going to use it anyway.
You cheat. I'm going to I'll get square with you. I've got my own, like my code is my own code.
Yeah, exactly. And then I love the Eddie Kingston match, which I think I love more for the build. The match was great as well, though, but obviously the build was definitely the best build, even though the MJF build was fantastic as well. Those are the three that definitely stand out. I think this one ranks first for me, at least in terms of just a match on its own. Partially just maybe a bit of bias because it kind of validated something that I've wanted to see for a long time, and kind of showed me, he is on that level, which is something that I've wanted for many years at that point. It was my favorite for that reason, but I think the match as well was just a little bit like better than the others, just because like you said, it tells that story of overcoming. It's the classic overcoming the monster story, but it tells it so well. And Mox is just the perfect guy to do it. And then again, some of those spots towards the end, and the finishing sequence was just so electric and fantastic. Obviously, I loved Eddie as well, but I feel like the match was just kind of like, it was much more about those two kind of figure out their own thing, and that was more a chapter within a story, whereas this match kind of was the story in a whole. So yeah, for me it's number one, but I can understand why someone might say Eddie or might say MJF or whatever. I don't think the Omega match quite lived up to expectation, and obviously when he beat Jericho was a great moment, but again the match was just good. It wasn't like amazing or anything. So for me, this is number one, I think. What about yourself? Because I know you're the big Moxley guy.
Yeah, look, this is the one that I voted for as my singles match of the year last year. I think really highly of this match, and I've thought about it a lot because I also like there's a brilliant Darby Allin match that he has on a Dynamite, which is just brilliant. I cannot wait to talk about that match. Also, of course, as you said, the build to the Eddie Kingston match. I don't think we've had promos that good since, like on both sides. Particularly in terms of a head-to-head face-off, just two people throwing down promos in the ring, man, so good. And I also feel like the build to the Winter is Coming match, it felt so epic. To me, it felt like this was the most important match in all of wrestling, and there could not be a bigger match at that point in all of wrestling than Jon Moxley versus Kenny Omega, because of the way they built Jon Moxley up, and also at the time built up Kenny Omega. And for that match, I feel like the beginning meandered a little bit. The ending was like, the ending stretch was fantastic. I just think like this was 15 minutes and it's just so economical in its time. And for me, a match doesn't have to go long to do well. In fact, sometimes if it goes long and it's just fiddle fighting around a little bit, that's actually a negative for me. Going long can actually be a detraction. And as I said, I actually compared this to the the match with Cody and Lance Archer earlier in the night, 22 minutes, and I think could have probably used a bit of trimming off. Yeah, this one for me, in terms of his AEW title defenses, I think this was my favorite because of a lot of it is because of Brodie Lee, but also just the contrast of these two characters and the way that they just worked so brilliantly together. The last thing I wanted to talk about was I think it is appropriate to talk about Brodie Lee because sadly this was possibly this and of course the TNT title match were the two biggest moments of his AEW career. You've said that you felt very validated when this match happened. Could you just expand on that a little bit? What you mean by that feeling?
Yeah, it was just like I said a few times already in this podcast, like Brody was someone that I just I was drawn to as a performer. I remember that Shield versus Wyatt family match in particular, and just seeing him within that and just thinking this guy, just with the right packaging and everything, he could be a star in his own right. He doesn't need to be in the Wyatt family or whatever, as much as I like the Wyatt family. And funnily enough, another match with Jon Moxley in it as well. The two guys that, obviously worked together well whenever they came up against each other. They had a match in CCW as well, which when Brody passed, I went back and watched. And whilst it's nothing, amazing, it shows that, where they were and where they eventually came to. And it was great that they kind of kept meeting each other along the way in their wrestling journeys and stuff. But yeah, in terms of Brody, you saw that back there in WE, and then when he spoke out about wanting to leave WE, that was before AEW was really a thing. I think it had been announced, but it hadn't, he hadn't seen AEW properly going to be like, oh, that looks way better, I want to go over there. He just wanted out, basically. And he had a match with Dominik Dijakovic, and he made a social media post about that, and that again just made me be like, it's such a shame because I thought
that was just on like one of the fan fests or something at WrestleMania.
Yeah. It wasn't on anything it probably was filmed, but it wasn't on like any show or anything. It just made me just think again, it's the age-old story of WWE misusing people and stuff. You could say it for so many people, but for Brody, it was really annoying for me because it felt to me like he was someone who never really even got a chance to. He obviously showed what he could do, but he was never given a chance to show it on a bigger stage, and it kind of just really annoyed me. Brody was just someone I really wanted to see do well. And again, he always came across as like a really nice guy when it came to social media. He wasn't like, oh, screw Vince, this company sucks. He was just like, I just want to leave, basically. I just want to go and fulfill my, myself somewhere else. And I think whether he'd gone to New Japan or if he'd gone to anywhere, I think I would have followed him in the same way I did kind of Cody, at least even if I wasn't watching the entire product, just checking out what he was doing. But it was really nice to see him leave and immediately jump into something so major, and for AEW to really recognize what he had and stuff. And again, it's kind of easier to say now because I think Tony Khan has kind of built a lot of trust in the fan base. But even at the time, things like the Dark Order, even earlier in that night, people were a little bit annoyed that Lance Archer lost the way he did against Cody, as we've kind of spoken about, So there were things that were kind of niggling on people. But Brody, for me, was one of the moments where I was like, this is a company that I can very much get on board with and give a level of trust to. So yeah, that was just what it was for me. And luckily, obviously, Brody continued until obviously he couldn't continue anymore, but continued to be great within AEW, and they continued to position him as someone who was a threat. It wasn't just a one-time thing or whatever, which certain other companies, sometimes you see that they just we need an opponent, we'll just do this for now and then we'll just do whatever, So yeah, it was validating in my support for Brody, and then also just in the trust for AEW. It went a long way for that as well.
Yeah, I'll just echo everything you've said there. I know that shout outs to Rich Latta from One Nation Radio on the Social Suplex podcast network, who was on a few weeks ago. I remember him saying really early on in the Wyatt run, I think it may have even been 2013, definitely 2014. Him just saying they picked the wrong guy. They should have gone. They should be going with Luke Harper here. And, you know, he had some really great moments in WWE, like the match with Dolph Ziggler, the ladder match that they had was just so perfectly structured. So incredibly crafted. And he had that match with Randy Orton that we mentioned in the run-in to WrestleMania 33, I'm going to say, when, you know, Randy was feuding with Bray Wyatt. And apparently Randy Orton afterwards was trying to get them to make it a triple threat match because he was that impressed by how
the fans were calling for it and everything.
Yeah.
Like, it's so annoying that they didn't do that.
Yeah, as we've said, it didn't pan out the way that I think anyone hoped for him in WWE. But I'm just so thankful we got to see these matches that he had. This one in particular, as I said, we've been very liberal with our praise to it, and for good reason, I think.
Yeah,
I think we'll call it a wrap there today, unless you have anything else you want to add there, Gareth.
Yeah, I'll just echo that thing of like, I'm so glad he got this final run to really show just how great he was, so that, you know, by the time he did pass, it was something where everyone really acknowledged how great he was, and then when he did pass, everyone realized, if they didn't already know, how much of a great guy he was as well. So yeah, just very, very glad he got that, really.
Yeah, and it was undisputed just how good he was by the end of it. It was just completely undisputed. And in part, I mean, people would have mourned his passing, of course, no matter what happened. But I think this just adds a level of greatness to his legacy. Yeah, look, tribute to Brodie Lee. Thank you very much for giving us this great memory in particular. And thank you for showing up today, Gareth. Can you tell the good people where they can find you?
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at Gareth_EW or EW, which I think is quite funny. But and then obviously I do the writings occasionally on Pro Wrestling Musings, and then also making video content around wrestling on YouTube at Eno Wrestling as well, which is what the EW stands for.
Excellent. And as I said, thank you very much for coming on, and thank you to you out there for listening. I really appreciate it. You can follow me on Twitter, Sir_Samuel. That's on Twitter. Next week on the AEW Match Guide podcast, we'll be covering Blood and Guts, and I'll be with the implicant for that. So please join me next week for that. But for the moment, thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you again next week. Thanks for listening to the AEW Match Guide podcast. If you enjoyed the show, then you can subscribe on the podcast app of your choice so you never miss an episode. Also, feel free to let me know on Twitter at Sir_Samuel. I'd love to hear from you. The AEW Match Guide podcast is brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network, where you can find many other fantastic podcasts discussing not just AEW, but all parts of the world of professional wrestling. Looking forward to seeing you again next week. I'm Sam Brown.
It used to be hard to find the exact auto parts you needed, and that meant spending a lot of time at swap meets. It's a different game now when you can order exactly what you need from eBay Motors. They have 122 million parts, so you can always find the right fitment. Spend less time searching and more time building with the eBay Motors app, or visit ebaymotors.com. Let's ride.